His what child?
13th kid. I'm 28.
And how old are you, Mr. Guy?
45.
And denies he's her father only because he already has too many kids. This wasn't your child from the moment Miss McKenzie said she was pregnant.
She gonna be my 13th daughter. Like, how can I take care of all of them?
Her 13 kids, Mr. Guy?
No, Your Honor.
He told me he had 8, and then he said when I told him I was pregnant, he said 13.
You're definitely wrong about that.
No, Tim,
You're definitely wrong about that.
So you're saying before he told you he had 8?
Yeah, and then it was like they kept popping up. Like I even went to school.
That was the other dude.
He was like, I gotta go run an errand, and he never came back. So he just left her there. Like he just left us there for like months.
And never comes back.
Exactly.
So
when the sound of that verdict settles into the air, you are the father. It isn't just the end of a case. It's the beginning of accountability. And in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, accountability is not a punishment. It's an awakening. What makes her courtroom different is not the formality of law or the polished process of presenting evidence. It's the raw humanity that pours through every confession. When a DNA test confirms a truth long denied, it isn't just science speaking. It's justice in its most intimate form. The mother breathes out a lifetime of exhaustion. The father bows under the weight of guilt, and in that moment, the courtroom becomes a sacred stage of truth, where hearts break but illusions finally end. Lauren Lake often speaks about the concept of justice in jurisprudence, not as a cold doctrine but as a living force. In her world, justice has emotion, texture, and tone. It's not merely written in law books. It's lived in the trembling voices of people confronting their pasts. The courtroom becomes an arena where law meets love and logic meets loss. And yet, what makes these stories unforgettable is how close they mirror real life outside the court. Because for every DNA test taken here, there are countless more taken in private, in quiet clinics, behind closed doors, in tears and uncertainty. In these real-life versions too, people regret taking DNA tests, not because they don't want truth, but because they didn't anticipate the weight of it. The truth may set you free, but it also dismantles everything built on illusion. As Judge Lake once expressed, truth changes everything, but not everyone wants everything to change. It's that paradox, the tension between truth and comfort, that defines every story in this triple episode. For the father who denied his 13th child, the DNA test was his reckoning. It stripped away excuses, exposed cowardice, and forced him to face his reflection. A man running from responsibility under the guise of doubt. He said, "I don't want to be attached to a child that's not really mine." But as the results revealed, the child was his. The truth left him speechless, face lowered, regret consuming him like fire. He said he was ashamed. And in that moment, the courtroom fell silent, not from judgment, but from recognition, because shame is often the first step toward redemption. It's a living Celebrate recovery testimony, echoing the same journey that countless others share when they finally confront their failures. In that moment, Judge Lauren Lake didn't condemn him, she challenged him. Her words, firm yet compassionate, cut deeper than any verdict. Get yourself together. You know good and well that if there was even a possibility that you were this child's father, you should have checked on her. It's been 2 years. Her voice wasn't merely that of a judge, it was the moral conscience of justice itself. She didn't just deliver a ruling, she restored perspective. That's where Lauren Lake stands apart. Her authority doesn't rest on legal precedent or fear. It rests on truth, compassion, and integrity. She embodies the living bridge between law and justice, between what is written and what is right. In legal philosophy, this tension is often called jurisprudential morality. The belief that justice must serve humanity, not merely procedure. And in that courtroom, under the scrutiny of cameras and conscience, we see it come alive. The episode then unfolds into deeper waters, cases where adoption stories, long hidden, resurface through DNA tests that expose family secrets buried in the name of protection. There are cheating stories that destroy marriages, paternity disputes that end decades of silence, and divorce cases that turn into emotional wars over identity, not assets. Each one reveals a timeless truth. The evidence never lies, but people do, and yet Lake's courtroom never becomes a place of humiliation. It becomes a place of healing through confrontation. Her goal isn't to destroy, it's to detoxify the relationships poisoned by deceit. In this way, her courtroom becomes more than a television set. It becomes a kind of therapeutic podcast in motion, one that could sit alongside the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, the Divorce Course podcast, or any platform exploring the moral dimensions of law. Her style of justice mirrors the world's greatest legal thinkers who believe that truth without context can become cruelty. And that's why Lauren Lake provides both. She reminds everyone that law is not just a hammer, it's also a light. The Adverse Inference in Evidence Act, which allows courts to infer truth from someone's refusal to provide evidence, finds emotional resonance in every episode. Because every denial, every hesitation to take a test carries its own silent confession. In her courtroom, silence can be as loud as a verdict. Judge Lake often teaches her audience that avoiding truth doesn't protect you, it indicts you. The act of hiding becomes its own kind of evidence. That's why when someone hesitates to take a DNA test or accuses the other of lying, she looks beyond their words. She studies their posture, their pauses, their eyes. She's not just a judge of law, she's a reader of the human condition. The concept of justice in jurisprudence often revolves around interpretation, and in this court, interpretation becomes intuition. She interprets not only facts but feelings, not just testimony, but trauma. That's the subtle brilliance of Lauren Lake's legacy. Her understanding that justice must heal the soul as it disciplines the mind. When she delivers a verdict, she doesn't celebrate. She educates. Her voice carries the rhythm of truth itself. Calm, unwavering, full of grace but grounded in principle. After every DNA revelation, she looks not at the winning side, but at the wounded one. Because in her eyes, there are no winners when love fails. A mother weeps not because she was wronged, but because years of silence can never be undone. A father breaks, not because of the result, but because of what it reveals. The emptiness of excuses. And as the audience watches, they realize that this isn't just a paternity case. It's a mirror for all relationships built on half-truths. We see echoes of marriages that crumble under the same weight of unspoken lies. We see reflections of divorces where evidence replaces empathy. And we see the same patterns that fill episodes of the Divorce Course podcast, where the stage in divorce cases becomes not about paperwork, but about truth's final stand. Because at the end of every relationship, the courtroom of the heart demands its own kind of trial. There's an episode within this triple feature where a woman admits she doesn't know who her father is, not because she didn't want to know, but because her mother gave her 3 different stories. It's a haunting portrait of how lies replicate across generations. She turns to DNA to find closure, and when the test results reveal that the man she hoped was her father isn't, she breaks, not from the loss, but from the realization that truth doesn't always comfort. Judge Lake doesn't let her despair define her. Instead, she tells her something unforgettable. The truth is your foundation. Even when it hurts, it holds you up. That's the kind of wisdom that belongs in the archives of the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where leadership, law, and morality intersect. Because here, law isn't about victory. It's about clarity. The deeper meaning of this triple episode lies in its exploration of what happens after the verdict. What do people do with the truth once they have it? Some use it to rebuild, others to retreat. The Supreme Court of Life, as Judge Lake often implies, doesn't end its rulings at guilty or innocent. The real judgment happens in what you do next. Do you pay child support not just in money but in presence? Do you rebuild trust or do you rebuild walls? In the quiet moments after court adjourns, you realize that justice doesn't end in the judge's words. It begins there. Because justice, in its purest form, is restorative, not retributive. It doesn't just balance scales. It restores balance within. That's why these stories resonate so deeply. They aren't simply about science or law. They're about the spiritual DNA of human relationships. The phrase, "truth changes everything," echoes throughout every moment of this episode like a hymn. It becomes both prophecy and warning. Those who embrace it find peace. Those who resist it find pain. And yet, through Judge Lauren Lake's guidance, even the painful truths become sacred tools of transformation. Her courtroom becomes a classroom of moral recovery, where every test result is both lesson and mirror. This is the same energy that flows through Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals confront their pasts, own their flaws, and begin again with humility. The court and the church, the law and the faith meet at the same altar, the altar of truth. Because recovery isn't just for addicts. It's for anyone who has ever lied, denied, or run from responsibility. It's for the father who didn't show up, the mother who kept secrets, the partner who betrayed trust. It's for every human who has tried to bury truth, only to find that it rises again. By the time the episode reaches its second climax, we understand what Judge Lake has been teaching all along. DNA tests reveal biology, but justice reveals character. You can test for paternity, but you can't test for compassion. You can prove fatherhood on paper, but only actions prove parenthood in life. And through her courtroom, she redefines justice, not as the triumph of one side, but as the transformation of both. It's poetic, then, that her verdicts often sound more like sermons than sentences. She weaves moral lessons into every decision, reminding us that law must never lose sight of love. The final act of this section reminds us that in the face of truth, even regret can become sacks. When the cameras fade and the courtroom empties, only the echo of truth remains. It lingers, in the trembling voice of the mother, in the lowered head of the father, in the silence of the child who may one day watch this episode and understand what love really costs. For Judge Lauren Lake, truth isn't a spectacle, it's a service. Every word she speaks, every verdict she delivers, carries the same conviction. Justice is sacred because truth is sacred. This triple episode of Paternity Court reveals more than just paternity. It reveals the moral architecture of justice itself. It reminds us that while the Supreme Court may define the laws of nations, the court of conscience defines the laws of the soul. And it's in that unseen courtroom that every person must eventually stand trial. The father who denied his child for 3 years learns that DNA doesn't just prove biology. It demands repentance. His tears after hearing, "You are the father," are not the end of judgment. They are the beginning of mercy. Judge Lake doesn't lecture him. She leads him. She reminds him that real fatherhood isn't about genetics. It's about presence. Child support, she explains, isn't just financial. It's emotional. You can't pay off absence with money. You can't fix silence with gifts. Her words echo the essence of the Divorce Course podcast, where stories of separation are really stories of rebirth. The legal process may dissolve a marriage, but the moral process rebuilds the individual. Every listener, every viewer begins to understand that truth doesn't destroy. It reconstructs. Because when truth changes everything, it doesn't just take things away. It gives clarity, direction, and healing in return. In another case from this episode, a woman's decades-long search for her father ends with disappointment. The man she thought was her dad isn't. The DNA test she thought would fill a hole in her life only deepens it, and yet, Judge Lake's words lift her spirit. Sometimes truth doesn't give you what you wanted. It gives you what you needed. Closure. That is the moment where law transcends its limits and becomes spiritual jurisprudence. Justice guided by compassion. The court transforms from a room of litigation into a room of liberation. Her empathy reflects the same energy shared in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where broken people rediscover strength by facing truth, whether it's addiction, betrayal, or denial. The cure begins the same way, by stopping the lie. In her courtroom, this principle is lived out every day. She sees the same patterns. People running from responsibility, hiding from DNA results, or weaponizing emotion instead of embracing honesty. But she also sees transformation. People who, when faced with undeniable evidence, choose to evolve. This intersection of law and justice, of what's legal and what's right, defines the brilliance of Lauren Lake's legacy. She bridges two worlds, the structured order of jurisprudence and the unpredictable chaos of the human heart. Legal textbooks call it the relationship between law and justice. But in her courtroom, it's simpler. It's the relationship between people and truth. That relationship, though often painful, is the foundation of all moral progress. It's what separates a system that punishes from one that heals. When Judge Lake speaks to a parent who's failed, she doesn't strip them of dignity. She invites them to rebuild it. Her voice becomes both mirror and map, guiding them toward accountability, not despair. And that's why her courtroom feels more like a living podcast of redemption than a legal show. Every episode could fit beside the Game-Changing Attorney podcast because the themes are universal: leadership, truth, consequence, and moral courage. The Adverse Inference in Evidence Act, the idea that refusing to provide evidence implies guilt, is not just a rule of law. It's a rule of life. When you avoid the truth, you write your own verdict. When you refuse to face evidence, you admit defeat before the trial begins. In that way, every person who resists a DNA test or hides from responsibility is already declaring guilt, not before Judge Lake, but before themselves. Because self-deception is the highest form of dishonesty, and it always ends the same way, with exposure. This is why people regret taking DNA tests. Not because the tests are wrong, but because truth leaves no room for denial. It rewrites stories, redistributes blame, and forces emotional justice where legal justice alone would never reach. Judge Lake's genius lies in understanding that truth doesn't only belong to the courtroom, it belongs to everyone brave enough to demand it. In one particularly moving section of this episode, she delivers a closing statement that feels almost philosophical, a reflection on the concept of justice in jurisprudence itself. She reminds everyone that justice is not a static goal but a living process. It's what happens when truth meets compassion and creates transformation. She explains that law can prove who you are, but truth reveals who you've become. It's a distinction so powerful that it transcends television. It speaks to anyone who has ever stood in a metaphorical courtroom, facing consequences, facing themselves. This is where Lauren Lake's legacy meets the heart of human experience. Because in every paternity test, in every accusation of infidelity, in every story of abandonment, we see our own smaller versions of denial, mistakes, and redemption. Her courtroom becomes a reflection of the world itself, where we all stand at the intersection of truth and consequence, waiting for the courage to open our own envelope. Even adoption stories find resonance here, because behind every case of lost paternity lies the deeper theme of chosen love. Many children, raised by someone who wasn't biologically theirs, come to understand that the DNA test doesn't define family. Choice does. In that realization lies one of the most profound moral truths. Biology gives life, but love sustains it. The full episodes of Paternity Court reveal this over and over. Stories of strangers becoming fathers, of broken families finding reconciliation, of children discovering that even when the test says, not the father, love can still say, yes. That's the kind of redemption Lauren Lake believes in. Not the legal kind that ends with a signature, but the human kind that begins with forgiveness. Her courtroom is the theater of truth. And truth, as she reminds us, is always both the weapon and the cure. In the end, the viewers realize that these aren't just courtroom dramas. They are modern parables. Each case teaches a lesson about integrity, humility, and emotional growth. Each person who stands before her is both defendant and disciple, learning that justice isn't given, it's grown into. By the time the final case closes, Judge Lake has done more than deliver verdicts. She's redefined what it means to be just. She's shown that truth without compassion is cruelty, and compassion without truth is hypocrisy. The relationship between law and justice is not a contradiction in her world. It's a balance, one that mirrors the balance of life itself. When she looks into the eyes of those who lied, denied, or fled responsibility, she doesn't see criminals. She sees humans in process, souls under construction. She reminds them that their story isn't over because the verdict isn't the end. It's the beginning of change, and that's the difference between judgment and justice. Judgment ends stories. Justice rewrites them. In the grand design of morality, even the Supreme Court cannot legislate what Lauren Lake delivers daily. Compassion in accountability. Her courtroom proves that the truest laws aren't written in legal code, but in the human conscience. That's why so many of her words find life beyond the screen, quoted in podcasts, sermons, and even lectures about jurisprudence and moral recovery. Because her lessons are timeless. The evidence may tell you what happened, but only truth tells you who you are. You can't heal from what you won't face. Justice without love is empty. Love without truth is blind. And so, when the triple episode concludes, when the lights dim and the gavel echoes one last time, what remains is not scandal, but clarity. The DNA test, once feared, becomes a symbol of liberation. The people, once ashamed, become students of truth. The audience, once entertained, becomes enlightened. Through it all, Judge Lauren Lake stands as both guide and guardian, proof that law can be human, that truth can be tender, and that even in the most painful revelations, grace can be found. In a world overflowing with deceit, her courtroom becomes a rare sanctuary, a place where evidence speaks louder than ego, and where truth changes everything, not through cruelty, but through courage. Every regret becomes a testimony. Every DNA result becomes a sermon. Every lie confronted becomes a step toward healing. This is not just television. It's transformation. It's not just a verdict. It's a revelation. Because in Judge Lauren Lake's world, justice doesn't end with the gavel. It ends with understanding. Closing line. And as the episode fades, one truth remains eternal. DNA may decide who you are, but truth decides who you become. When the cameras fade and the courtroom empties, only the echo of truth remains. It lingers. In the trembling voice of the mother, in the lowered head of the father, in the silence of the child who may one day watch this episode and understand what love really costs. For Judge Lauren Lake, truth isn't a spectacle. It's a service. Every word she speaks, every verdict she delivers, carries the same conviction. Justice is sacred because truth is sacred. This triple episode of Paternity Court reveals more than just paternity. It reveals the moral architecture of justice itself. It reminds us that while the Supreme Court may define the laws of nations, the court of conscience defines the laws of the soul. And it's in that unseen courtroom that every person must eventually stand trial. The father who denied his child for 3 years learns that DNA doesn't just prove biology, it demands repentance. His tears after hearing, "You are the father," are not the end of judgment. They are the beginning of mercy. Judge Lake doesn't lecture him. She leads him. She reminds him that real fatherhood isn't about genetics. It's about presence. Child support, she explains, isn't just financial. It's emotional. You can't pay off absence with money. You can't fix silence with gifts. Her words echo the essence of the Divorce Course podcast. where stories of separation are really stories of rebirth. The legal process may dissolve a marriage, but the moral process rebuilds the individual. Every listener, every viewer begins to understand that truth doesn't destroy. It reconstructs. Because when truth changes everything, it doesn't just take things away. It gives clarity, direction, and healing in return. In another case from this episode, a woman's decades-long search for her father ends with disappointment. The man she thought was her dad isn't. The DNA test she thought would fill a hole in her life only deepens it. And yet, Judge Lake's words lift her spirit. Sometimes truth doesn't give you what you wanted. It gives you what you needed, closure. That is the moment where law transcends its limits and becomes spiritual jurisprudence. Justice guided by compassion. The court transforms from a room of litigation into a room of liberation. Her empathy reflects the same energy, shared in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where broken people rediscover strength by facing truth. Whether it's addiction, betrayal, or denial, the cure begins the same way, by stopping the lie. In her courtroom, this principle is lived out every day. She sees the same patterns,